Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the damp, bone-chilling wilds of medieval Scotland. A place where the sheep are hardier than you, and the wind has a personal vendetta. Imagine waking up before dawn in a squat little turf-walled hut, the kind that leaks if a sheep so much as sneezes nearby. Your bedding? Straw maybe. Flea-ridden, definitely. Your nose is already red from the cold, and your hands are stiff, but congratulations. You've survived another night. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push the creaky door open and get a gust of air so wet and sharp it feels like a slap from Poseidon himself. There's fog clinging to the hills like a jealous ghost, and your bare feet sink into cold mud before you've even said your morning prayers. But that's the medieval Scottish way. Welcome to a world where discomfort is your closest companion and the nearest soap is about 4 centuries away. Let's talk hygiene, or rather the total absence of it. You haven't bathed in weeks, maybe months. Water's too precious for that luxury, and warm water? That's basically black magic. You scrub your face with snow when you can find it, and as for your clothes, woolen, coarse, and permanently damp, they're more mold than fabric now. A fringe belief at the time held that washing too often could open the pores and let the illness in. So in a tragic twist, cleanliness was seen as a health risk. And you smell like it. You reach for your breakfast, yesterday's leftover barley mash, cold and possibly sprouting new life. If you're lucky, a scrap of smoked fish. If you're really lucky, it isn't full of worms. Historians still argue whether the average Scottish peasant had enough caloric intake to survive winter, or if survival was more of a desperate negotiation with each passing day. Food aside, illness stalks you like a loyal dog. Coughing, hacking, boils, and a mysterious rash. That's just Monday. You've never heard the words vitamin deficiency, but you live them. Your teeth are a horror show. Scurvy creeps in by midwinter, and if a cut goes bad, well, that's just your body gently quitting its job. Now, about your house. It's a low, squat thing, half sunk into the earth to keep in what little heat you've managed to trap. The floor is dirt. The roof is sod and bracken, always threatening to collapse. You share this space with your family, and maybe a goat. There's no privacy, just a constant stream of sniffles, snoring, and the occasional sheep fart. And no chimney either, just smoke drifting up into the rafters, slowly poisoning everyone over time. One quirky detail: some families believed putting live coals under the bed could keep evil spirits at bay. Or maybe they just liked warm toes and were willing to risk spontaneous combustion. Education? Huh. The only letters you recognize are shaped like crosses and carved on gravestones. You can't read, but you can skin a rabbit blindfolded. The nearest monastery, your closest access to anything resembling knowledge, is 2 days' walk, and even then, they're more interested in copying scripture than explaining what a germ is. The villagers don't trust outsiders, and for good reason. You're likely to get robbed, taxed or accused of something deeply ridiculous. Just last week, old Moira down the road was blamed for spoiling the butter. Witch, someone muttered. And that's enough. Her hut was burned by morning. Justice medieval style. You trudge through your chores with numb fingers and a resigned sigh. Gather firewood. Though every tree for miles has been picked clean, dig peat. Back-breaking work, and it stinks when it burns. Tend animals. Half are sick, the other half are plotting an escape. You catch yourself staring at the hills, daydreaming of something easier, like raiding England or being eaten by a bear. One mainstream truth, even by medieval standards, Scotland in the Middle Ages was especially rough. Isolated terrain, brutal winters, constant political instability, and an economy that barely functioned. Survival here wasn't a way of life. It was a full-time job with no holidays, no health care, and no guaranteed pay. At night, there's no comfort. Just you, the fire's dying glow, and a soundtrack of wind howling like it knows your name. You hear something scurry in the thatch above you. Rat? Bird? Minor demon? Hard to say. You wrap your cloak tighter and close your eyes, but the chill never leaves. It just seeps into your bones, slow and determined. And the worst part? Tomorrow will be the same. Or maybe worse. You heard rumors of raiders nearby. A clan feud flaring up again. Someone in the next valley found a dead cow, eyes plucked out, tongue cut. A message? A curse? Or just hungry wolves? Historians still debate whether the average medieval Scot considered this normal or just less terrible than last year. One thing's certain. You didn't get to dream of comfort. You just hoped the roof stayed on, the cough didn't get worse, and that nothing, human or beast, came knocking in the dark. Because if it did, you probably won't survive this. You've barely gotten through the mud-splattered morning when a sharp whistle rolls across the hills. It's not wind this time. It's a signal. Your cousin hears it too, and both of you freeze like hunted deer. No one whistles like that unless it's trouble. Clan trouble. Now, if you're thinking family drama just means someone borrowed your axe and didn't return it, oh sweet summer child. In medieval Scotland, clan loyalty is your armor, your resume, your 24/7 insurance policy, and your only chance of dying with all your teeth. If you're not part of a strong clan, you're not just alone. You're a walking target with a birthmark that says, "Stab me." You rush up the slope, boots squelching, kilt flapping, heart thudding like a war drum. There's already a small group gathered, men, women, even a half-grown boy with a sling, eyes sharp, weapons sharper. Something happened. Maybe a Campbell wandered too close. Maybe a MacDonald stole some cattle. Or maybe someone insulted someone else's grandfather, and now a generation-long blood feud is about to reboot itself. Again. Historians still argue whether these clan rivalries were truly about honor or just very elaborate excuses to kill your neighbors and take their cows. Either way, it doesn't matter. You're here, you're armed, and you're expected to fight if it comes to that. Clan structure is everything. You live and die by the name you carry. It dictates your protection, your marriage prospects, and whether your neighbor will share grain with you or burn your house down. The chief is a kind of local king, part warlord, part judge. part charismatic uncle who once gutted a man with a broken spoon. If he calls on you, you answer. No questions, no excuses, unless you want to end up as a cautionary tale. But let's say you're clanless. Maybe your parents died in a raid. Maybe you were born to a disgraced line. Maybe your father insulted a bard and got cursed for 3 generations. Doesn't matter. You're as good as invisible. No one will defend you. No one will avenge you. And if you get caught on the wrong hilltop at the wrong time, someone might test out their new dirk on your ribs just for fun. There's a fringe tale still whispered in the western glens about a man who tried to live between clans, like some neutral Switzerland, built himself a hut on no man's land, swore oaths to neither side. He lasted 2 months. Then both clans decided he must be a spy for the other and tossed him in a lock, tied to a stone, upside down. You get the idea. Today's skirmish is narrowly avoided. Someone recognizes the intruder. It's just Finley's cousin from 3 hills over, looking for a lost sheep. Still, no one lowers their weapons until the chief himself gives a nod. Peace for now. But everyone's eyes linger just a little too long on each other. Next time, it won't end with nods. It'll end with smoke. You walk back with your kin, adrenaline fading, tension knotting in your shoulders. This isn't a rare event. You're raised on these moments. Your lullabies were war songs. Your bedtime stories featured heroic uncles who lopped off limbs and got commemorated in drunken ballads. The sword isn't ceremonial. It's your insurance plan. Even children carry little knives, more for show than use, but still, the habit starts early. One mainstream fact: the clan system in medieval Scotland was both incredibly tight-knit and dangerously volatile. Feuds could last decades, often fueled by real grievances, but just as often by pride, cattle theft, or someone marrying the wrong person. And when your clan went to war, it wasn't abstract. It was your uncle, your brother, your own 2 hands. And just when you start thinking this is all a bit much, remember, it wasn't just other Scots you had to worry about. English invaders, Norse raiders, and later, even the crown itself would try to crush your clan into submission. The crown wanted centralized control. You just wanted to live long enough to see next winter without having to bury anyone you loved. So you sharpen your blade again tonight. You oil the leather strap on your belt. You glance toward the hearth where the clan's symbols hang like protective charms, carved stones, bits of antler, and the ever-present blackthorn staff. You wonder how long until they're called upon again, because they always are. Historians still debate the psychological toll of living in a constant low simmer of potential violence. Did it make people braver? Paranoid? Both? It's hard to say, but it definitely meant you didn't get many lazy Sundays. By moonrise, you're back in the hut, the fire crackling low, and your mother humming an old Gaelic tune you only half remember. You stare at the rafters and listen, always listening, because even peace in medieval Scotland has teeth and sleeps with one eye open. By the time the fog lifts, if it does, you're already expecting violence. That's not pessimism, it's just arithmetic. Medieval Scotland is like a Game of Thrones, except no one has money, dragons, or indoor plumbing. All you've got is a short blade, a long grudge, and the kind of terrain that encourages sneak attacks by people you used to babysit. You're always at war, not occasionally, not seasonally, always. First, there's the English. Their armies don't just pop in for a quick looting and a cup of tea. They arrive like a bad storm, long, muddy, full of shouting, and they stay for years. Castles get taken, retaken, burned down, then rebuilt using the same miserable stones. They've got longbows and siege ladders. You've got hills, bogs, and a grudge that goes back 3 monarchs. Then there are the Norse. A lot of folks forget this, but Norse raiders weren't just Icelandic extras with horned helmets. They were deeply interested in Scotland, especially the islands and coasts, Orkney, Shetland, the Hebrides. They were basically Viking theme parks for centuries. You live inland, sure, but you've heard the stories. Sleek ships gliding silently into harbor, then vanishing with your cattle, your silver, and half your cousins. Historians still argue whether Norse influence enriched the culture or just traumatized the shoreline forever. And then, just to keep things spicy, there's your own people. Remember the clan from Section 2? Yeah, they're lovely. Until a border dispute breaks out over a patch of grazing land the size of a soccer pitch. Then it's all swords and fire again. You know that neighborly family from across the glen? They're eyeing your grain storage and remembering that your great-uncle once insulted their sheep. Military service isn't optional. You don't enlist. You're expected to show up when the chief sends word. You grab your dirk, your targe, that's the round wooden shield, and maybe an axe if your father lets you borrow it. No armor. Maybe a leather jerkin if you're lucky. You line up beside lads who were your drinking buddies last week, and you march toward a hill where you'll probably bleed together by lunch. Training? That's adorable. Your training was watching your older brother get gutted for standing too close to the front. So you learn quick. You learn how to move with the wind, how to slip on moss without losing balance, how to make your scream sound like you're already winning. There's a quirky old tactic called the Highland Charge. Basically, you scream your lungs out and sprint full speed at the enemy with your blade raised in zero sense of self-preservation. Shock and awe, medieval style. It works sometimes. Other times, you meet a wall of spears and find out exactly how deep mud can get. One mainstream fact: during the wars of Scottish independence, battles like Stirling Bridge and Bannockburn showed how deeply entrenched Scottish warfare had become. Clever terrain use, ambushes, and guerrilla tactics weren't just strategy. They were necessity. You didn't have the numbers or equipment, but you had mountains and an attitude problem. War doesn't pause for weather. You might be knee-deep in snow or slipping through rain-slicked heather. You eat whatever you can carry, usually dried oats, salted meat, or nothing. Water's straight from the stream, parasites included. You sleep in the open, unless someone's already using that rock as a pillow. And when you wake, sore and soaked, you look around and realize you're still outnumbered. That's okay. You're used to it. You've watched castles fall. Some from a distance, others from the inside. They're not the Disney version. Most are damp, drafty strongholds with murder holes and pit toilets. Still, they matter. Whoever controls the castle usually controls the region. And you've stormed at least one, though all you remember is fire, screaming, and slipping on something that wasn't mud. Historians still debate how much of Scotland's medieval identity was shaped by warfare versus survival. Were the people warlike because they loved battle, or because they had no other option? Either way, you didn't grow up with peace. You grew up hearing about uncles who never came back and lands that changed hands 3 times in a month. Sometimes the enemy wears the same plaid as you. Sometimes it's soldiers sent by a king you've never seen, whose language you don't even speak. Sometimes it's just hunger, marching in on bony legs and stealing your will to fight. You once saw a man trade his sword for a half loaf of bread. He didn't last long. By the time the sun drops, your muscles are screaming. You sit with your back to a tree, watching the mist curl over the hills like a shroud. The man next to you mutters a prayer. You pretend not to hear it. Everyone pretends they aren't afraid. But you are. Of course you are. Because tomorrow the horn might blow again. And when it does, you'll rise, limping, aching, but ready. Because there's no other choice. And you fight. Because in medieval Scotland, if you don't fight, you die. And even if you fight, you still probably die. You're exhausted, filthy, and covered in more layers of dried sweat and old blood than you care to count. And what reward awaits your heroic return from battle? A meal. Maybe, if you can call it that. Food in medieval Scotland is less culinary experience and more daily dare. The kitchen, if you can even call the smoky corner of your hut a kitchen, is a blackened hole with a pot that's never truly empty, because no one's ever cleaned it. You just keep adding new things on top of the old until the stew develops a personality. Tonight's menu? Porridge. Again. Not the sweet, creamy kind. No cinnamon, no berries, just boiled oats thick enough to patch a wall, possibly laced with grit from the grinding stone, and always a little burnt. You spoon it down with the same joy you'd feel licking a barn wall. But it's warm. That's something. If it's a good week, by which we mean no raiders, no failed crops, and no suspicious cow deaths, you might get barley bread or some dried meat. Not beef. That's valuable. You eat the bits that can't be sold or bartered. Liver, heart, tongue, or better yet, salted fish that's been hanging in the smoke for so long it tastes like the chimney. Fringe belief time. In some corners of the Highlands, people thought the spleen of a freshly killed animal, when dried and powdered, could boost strength and fertility. You don't question it. You just hold your nose and chew. Dairy? Sure, if your cow's still alive. Cheese was hard, sour, and deeply suspicious. Butter came with a thin layer of mystery on top, sometimes flavored with the herbs your grands swore would keep away evil spirits, or at least keep you regular. And eggs? Fresh if you're lucky. Otherwise, you don't ask questions. The yolk shouldn't rattle, but here we are. You've never seen an orange. You've heard rumors about a banana, but honestly, that just sounds made up. Your only fruit is a handful of wrinkled crab apples, or in summer, berries that may or may not be poisonous. One of your cousins died testing that theory. Brave lad. Or hungry. Probably both. One mainstream fact. Medieval Scottish diets were heavily dependent on grains like oats and barley. Most meals were variations of porridge, bread, and broth. Meat was reserved for festivals or the upper class, while root vegetables like turnips and onions provided the bulk of daily calories when they were available. Let's talk drinking. Water isn't exactly safe. Most streams are downstream from something you'd rather not think about, so you drink ale. Weak, flat, homemade ale. Children drink it too. It's safer than the water, and it helps with the taste of that porridge you're pretending is a real meal. If you're inland, you've probably never had wine. If you're coastal, you might have once sniffed a bottle a monk brought back from France. And speaking of monks, if you're near a monastery, you might get lucky. Their kitchens are better stocked, their gardens more productive, and they often brew potent beer. You've heard of something called mead, honey wine. You've tasted it once. It was dreamy. You cried a little, then you tripped into a wall and didn't remember anything until morning. Feast days are the only real breaks in this misery, not just because of the food, but because there's an excuse to eat meat without guilt. A pig gets roasted on a spit, people bring out hoarded cheese wheels and stale ale, and someone plays a bagpipe loud enough to rattle the sheep. You eat until you can't breathe, and for a moment, life almost feels soft. Historians still debate how nutritious the medieval Scottish diet really was. Some argue that, despite its monotony, it met basic needs due to the reliance on whole grains and local produce. Others point to skeletal remains with stunted growth, worn teeth, and signs of chronic malnutrition. The truth likely depends on where you lived, what year it was, and whether or not your village was on fire at the time. But most days, your food hates you. It mocks you with its blandness. It chews back. And it never, ever fills you up. By bedtime, your stomach growls like a wolf with indigestion. You sip some ale, lie back against the dirt wall of your hut, and try not to think about how many more winters you can survive eating swampy porridge and expired goat. Outside, an owl calls. The wind shifts. You hear something rustle near the grain bin and pray it's only mice. You'd kill for cheese. Literally. You did once. That's a story for another night. Because tomorrow's meal, same as today. And if you're very, very lucky, it might not try to run away. It starts to rain sometime after midnight, not the soft, poetic kind that patters gently on the roof. No, this is Scottish rain, like a wet fist from the sky. It doesn't fall so much as it hurls itself downward in sheets, turning everything into mud pudding before you can blink. By morning, the thatch of your roof is weeping, the fire's nearly out, and your bedding is as damp as your outlook on life. Weather here isn't just a backdrop, it's a full-blown antagonist. Scotland's climate in the medieval period is a constant test of your patience, sanity, and structural engineering skills. You get about 2 types of days: miserably wet or untrustworthily sunny. Sunshine makes you nervous. It lures you outside, tempts you to hang your cloaks to dry, and then slaps you with a hailstorm mid-walk. One mainstream historical fact: from roughly the 14th to 19th centuries, much of Europe, including Scotland, experienced what's known as the Little Ice Age. Winters got colder, harvests failed more often, and the weather turned just erratic enough to ensure you could never relax. Even your summer looked like someone else's late November. You trudge outside, boots squelching in the muck, to find that your garden has flooded again. Those onions you were counting on for winter stew are now floating like tiny, sodden ghosts of your dinner plans. The sheep are glaring at you from a dry patch under the eaves, and the peat stack you worked all spring to build is a sad black sponge. There's a wordless despair in your chest. You feel it often. You even gave it a nickname, Tuesday. Some villagers believe in weather omens. A red sky at dawn? The gods are angry. Sudden fog. Spirits walking. Lightning that hits the same hill twice? Definitely witchcraft. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were symbolic metaphors or deeply held truths. You don't really care. If blaming the weather on an old crone keeps you sane, you'll toss salt over your shoulder with the best of them. Rain makes everything harder. Your cloak never dries. Your hut starts to rot from the bottom up. Foot rot is real, and you've got the rash to prove it. Going anywhere means slipping down hills, losing a boot, and arriving cold, wet, and 2 hours late. And that's just walking to the next village. Forget long journeys unless you're desperate or being chased. Which, let's be honest, is fairly common. Even when it doesn't rain, it's damp. The kind of damp that seeps into your bones and makes your teeth ache just from smiling. You don't remember what dry socks feel like. You're not even sure if you've ever had dry socks. That's just a legend the monks talk about in their warmer rooms. Winter is a whole different beast. Snow arrives like a smug little tyrant and makes everything worse. Your firewood disappears twice as fast. Your livestock huddle together and moo judgmentally. You've got maybe 2 cloaks to your name, and you wear them both, layered like cabbage. Some days you don't take off your boots, not because it's warm, but because you're afraid you won't be able to get them back on again. Quirky survival tip: some folk fill their shoes with dried moss or sheep wool to soak up the damp and keep toes from falling off. You've done it. It mostly works. Until the moss gets wet. Then it's just soggy mulch between your toes, and you start to question your life choices. Again. You know what the worst part is? There's no escape. The Highlands are dramatic, yes, stunning even, but that beauty has teeth. Every breathtaking glen is a wind tunnel. Every craggy ridge hides frostbite. You dream of warm lands, places where crops don't mold on the stalk and fire doesn't go out from one aggressive gust. But dreams are for other people. People who don't have to drain puddles from their bedroll. And yet, you adapt. You learn how to thatch better, layer wool cleverly, even huddle with others for warmth, whether you like them or not. There's a kind of grim camaraderie in shivering together. You joke that if the rain ever stopped, the whole country would collapse out of sheer confusion. Historians still debate whether this climate alone shaped Scottish resilience. Did it breed the stubbornness, the grit, the weatherproof humor? Or did that come from the endless warfare and terrible food? Probably all of the above, honestly. As the day winds down, you drag your body inside, scrape off the mud with a stick, and relight the fire. Smoke curls up into your eyes, but you barely flinch anymore. Someone hands you a wooden cup of ale, weak and lukewarm, and you drink like it's a gift from the gods. Outside, the wind howls again. A loose shutter bangs in the distance. You pull your cloak tight and mutter something about moving to Ireland. No one laughs. The last man who said that froze halfway across the moor, because in medieval Scotland, the weather isn't something you endure. It's something you survive. And honestly, you're not sure how much longer you can keep doing that. By now, you've come to accept that life in medieval Scotland is one long endurance test. But just when you think the rain and starvation are your worst problems, someone's cow starts foaming at the mouth, a child breaks out in boils, and suddenly you're the suspected witch. Witchcraft, curses, bad omens. In your time, these aren't fringe beliefs whispered by eccentrics. They're woven into daily life like the warp and weft of your itchy wool tunic. When something goes wrong, and let's be honest, something always goes wrong, someone must be to blame. And if you're old, odd, or just a little too quiet, congratulations, you're the village scapegoat. It starts small, a spoiled batch of cheese, a baby born with a limp, a milk cow that dries up too early. People glance sideways at the widow who talks to herself, or the herbalist who knows too much about foxglove, or you, if you've been seen picking herbs by moonlight or muttering after stubbing your toe. One mainstream fact: belief in witchcraft and folk magic was strong throughout medieval Europe, but Scotland had its own flavor, steeped in Celtic traditions, Christian theology, and deeply rooted superstitions. It wouldn't be until the 16th and 17th centuries that the witch hunts reached full mania, but the seeds were already there in the Middle Ages, rustling beneath the heather. Accusations usually come suddenly. There's no warning. You're out feeding the chickens, and the next thing you know, someone points and screams, "Curse bringer," or the Gaelic equivalent, and the mood turns colder than a Highland winter. Sometimes it's a whisper campaign. Sometimes it's a full-on mob with torches and a rope. And what do? You can't prove innocence. There's no legal team, no evidence, just fear and folklore. You remember a story of a woman who tried to defend herself by reciting prayers backward to confuse the devil. It didn't work. They drowned her in the bog anyway. Quirky tidbit. One strange belief held that witches couldn't cry genuine tears. So during your trial, which might consist of the village elder staring into your face, you might be ordered to weep on command. No tears. Guilty. Too many tears? Manipulative. Just enough? Suspiciously convenient. You might also be tested by water. They tie your hands, toss you in the river, and watch. If you sink, you're innocent, but dead. If you float, clearly the devil's holding you up, and you're dragged out for punishment. Historians still argue whether anyone truly believed these trials were effective, or if they were just public theater masking communal fear and frustration. Even if you're not accused yourself, the fear touches everything. There are charms above your door to ward off the evil eye. Salt lines around the livestock pens, bits of iron hidden in cribs to stop changelings. Yes, some people believe that if a baby cries too much or looks oddly wrinkled, the fairies might have swapped it. You've seen a mother hold her baby over a flame, just a little, to test if it screams like a normal child. It did. This time, you don't scoff, you don't roll your eyes, because the fear is real. Not because you believe in demons, but because you believe in people. And people, when frightened and hungry and surrounded by death, will look for someone to burn. Even the church is in on it. Monks preach about sin and temptation, and while some are kind and practical, teaching herbal remedies and offering warmth, others are fire-eyed fanatics. You remember one sermon where a friar screamed for an hour about women with demon cats hiding in their skirts. You never looked at the village tabby the same way again. Mainstream society doesn't separate medicine from magic. A poultice might be healing, or it might be hexing. A dream might be divine, or devilish. And gods help you if you mention talking to a crow. Everyone knows crows carry messages between witches and the underworld. You just liked the way it tilted its head. Too late. Your own grandmother once cured a fever using boiled nettles and a chant. Now you're scared to speak of it, lest someone decide that's too much knowledge for a peasant. Historians still debate whether the fear of witchcraft was truly about control over women, or whether it stemmed from a broader cultural terror of the unknown, disease, death, storms, famine, probably both. But in the end, someone's always blamed. And justice? That's less about truth and more about keeping the village calm. When the wind howls strangely, or a bird drops dead mid-flight, you know to avoid eye contact. You know not to walk the long way home. You know not to speak too kindly to a sick cow, because mercy looks suspicious, and suspicion kills. By nightfall, you're sitting by the hearth, watching the flames, pretending not to hear the whispers. Someone's been stealing eggs again. A pig got sick. The chief's son had a nightmare about fire. It might blow over, or it might be your turn. Because in medieval Scotland, truth is fragile, fear is loud, and survival often depends on how quietly you live. At this point, you might be wondering, if getting cursed, stabbed, or starved doesn't get you, what happens when you just get sick? That's easy. You either die slowly, or you visit someone with a bowl of leeches and a very questionable understanding of anatomy. Welcome to the medical system in medieval Scotland. A thrilling blend of hopeful prayer, herbal guesswork, and the occasional bleeding session that removes everything except the disease. Let's say you wake up with a fever. Your skin's hot, your stomach's turning, and you're seeing sparkles that definitely aren't angels. You groan, stagger outside, and someone suggests you've caught the bad air. Miasma theory is in full swing now. People believe disease floats through the air like a ghost with boundary issues. So, what's the fix? Burn something that smells worse, usually dried dung or herbs, so the evil vapors can't reach you. You lie there, wheezing, surrounded by smoking nettle and goat droppings, wondering how this is your life. One mainstream fact: most medieval Scots had no access to professional doctors. Medicine was handled by monks, midwives, or local folk healers. Monasteries sometimes kept rudimentary herb gardens and copied down ancient medical texts, but even then, the treatments were more guesswork than guarantee. You might try the local healer, an old woman with a crooked finger and a collection of dried animal parts hanging over her door. She's got a remedy for everything: nettle soup for rashes, garlic for toothache, ground thistle root for fever. Some of it works. Some of it works by accident. Some of it just makes your urine smell funny. But you drink it all, because the only other option is waiting for your toes to fall off. Feeling worse? Time to visit the nearest monastery. If you can survive the 2-day walk without vomiting on your own boots, a kindly monk might take you in. They'll say a prayer, smear something cold on your forehead, and recommend a fast. That's monk speak, for we have no food for you anyway. If your condition turns gruesome, say a swelling the size of a plum erupts on your leg, the options get darker. Amputation is a last resort, and by last we mean this will kill you. But at least you won't infect anyone else. No anesthetic, of course. You get a belt to bite down on and someone to sit on your chest. The monk with the cleaver isn't a surgeon. He's just the one with the strongest stomach. Historians still argue whether some monasteries had advanced techniques compared to the wider population. There's evidence of tree panning. Yes, they drilled into skulls to release spirits or pressure, and some bone setting that was surprisingly effective. But even then, survival depended on luck, infection rates, and whether the patient could keep enough food down to recover. Let's not forget childbirth. You've watched women give birth squatting over rushes, surrounded by worried neighbors and the midwife who smells of mint and graveyards. No sterile tools, no understanding of sepsis, no pain relief beyond bite this stick. If the baby survives, it's baptized before sundown, just in case it dies in the night. If the mother survives, she's expected to be hauling water again within a week, probably with stitches. There's a quirky local belief that drinking water infused with moonlight can ward off infection. You've tried it. Tastes like disappointment. Sometimes people blame demons or elves for illness. Elf shot is a common diagnosis for sudden pains or paralysis, thought to be caused by invisible fairy arrows. What's the cure? A charm, maybe a chant, and a poultice made of mashed fern leaves. You don't believe it works, but your neighbor swears it saved his goat. Then again, that goat also ate a nail and survived. Other times, healing is left to fate. If someone's really sick, they might be placed outside overnight, wrapped in a burial shroud, to see if the spirits want to take them. If they're still breathing by morning, the family celebrates. If not, well, fewer mouths to feed. In the rare event someone gets better, they're viewed with suspicion. Did they pray hard enough? Or did they make a deal? You've seen people get side-eyed for recovering too quickly. Healthy starts to look an awful lot like unnatural. And still, you keep going. You develop your own little remedies. A paste of ash and honey for cuts, chewed bark for aching gums. You sleep facing east because someone said that wards off night terrors. You don't know if it helps, but it can't hurt. Historians still debate whether medieval Scottish medicine was hopeless or just underdocumented. Some point to remarkable herb lore and bone-setting techniques passed down orally through generations. Others note the sheer volume of death and shake their heads. You lean somewhere in between. When you feel sick, you whisper a prayer and hope the healer is sober that day. By dusk, you've managed to keep down some broth, and your fever seems to be breaking. Your head still pounds, your skin still clammy, and you're fairly sure the poultice on your chest is moldy, but you're alive. For now. You curl up by the fire, scratch at a flea bite, and mutter thanks to every saint you can name. Because in medieval Scotland, medicine isn't about recovery. It's about surviving just long enough for something else to kill you. You're finally feeling halfway human, just in time to watch someone get hauled through the mud on a rope. Shouting follows, then spitting, then stones. Justice is being served. Or at least, that's what they're calling it. Medieval Scottish justice makes your stomach churn faster than the moss wine the monks tried to brew that one time. There's no such thing as innocent until proven guilty. There's not even such a thing as guilty until proven innocent. There's just guilty. Especially if people are bored, angry, or low on bread. One mainstream fact: justice in medieval Scotland was often local, clan-based, and informal. While there were royal sheriffs and traveling judges by the later medieval period, most disputes were settled by chieftains, lords, or whatever elder happened to shout the loudest. And if you weren't part of a powerful clan, you had about as much legal protection as a wet sock. The man in the mud, he's accused of stealing. Not much. A small sack of grain, maybe. It's hard to say. The miller claims he saw it, but he also claims the moon told him so in a dream. Doesn't matter. The accused has no way to prove otherwise. And your village doesn't exactly have a courthouse. Justice is swift, sloppy, and very public. You've seen punishments ranging from flogging to finger removal to public shaming. Stocks in the square, barefoot marches through the moor, or, for serious crimes, hanging from the crooked yew tree by the chapel. Sometimes the rope breaks. Sometimes they make a show of tying it tighter the second time. Open scholarly debate still brews over whether such punishments were meant more for deterrence or retribution. Did medieval communities believe in reform? Or was justice simply about putting on a spectacle to keep everyone else in line? Trials, when they happen at all, are brief. Witnesses might be your neighbors, hardly impartial. The accused rarely gets to speak, and when they do, it's usually interrupted by shouting. Verdicts are based on reputation, rumor, and how many enemies you've accidentally made at the tavern. Fringe detail. In certain cases, a bizarre test called trial by touch is used. If a murder suspect is brought near the corpse and it starts to bleed anew, then the suspect is guilty. Of course, corpses sometimes leak fluids naturally, especially if poorly buried. But try explaining that to a mob with pitchforks. You once watched a woman punished for sorcery because her cow gave birth to a calf with 2 heads. The village council, which, to be fair, was just 3 drunk men and the priest, declared it a demonic omen. Her sentence? Shaved hair, exile, and her home torched. The priest called it cleansing. You called it Tuesday. What about land disputes? Forget contracts. Property is about who can defend it and who has the better connections. If 2 clans argue over a hillside, it's settled in the traditional way. One group sharpens axes, the other builds a small barricade, and someone eventually dies. Problem solved. You know a story, everyone does, about a man who sued a noble over stolen sheep. The court summoned him. All right, but he was made to kneel for 3 hours while the noble's dogs barked at him. By the end, he'd forgotten his own argument and apologized for wasting the court's time. His sheep were never seen again. Neither was he. And yet, justice isn't always brutal. Sometimes, oddly, it's poetic. A thief might be made to serve the family he stole from for a year. A liar might wear a carved wooden mask in the village square with a painted tongue sticking out. A drunk who knocked over the altar once had to repair the roof of the chapel he'd never even stepped inside. Small things, local wisdom, community embarrassment, quirky practice. In some Highland areas, petty crimes could be forgiven if the offender composed a song admitting guilt. Sing it publicly with enough wit, and you might just walk free. It turns punishment into performance. And honestly, the tunes were catchy. But don't get the wrong idea. The justice system may occasionally smile, but its teeth are always showing. If you're a woman, your chances of fair treatment drop by half. If you're a stranger, forget it. if you're poor, ill, or unfortunate enough to sneeze during a funeral, start running. Historians still debate whether fear of punishment actually reduced crime, or if it just drove people to settle disputes quietly with fists and whispered threats. Based on what you've seen, the latter seems more likely. Feuds get handled in the dark. Justice happens in the daylight. Neither is particularly kind. Tonight, as the wind howls over the hills and the moon hides behind cloud, you sit by the fire and think about that man in the mud. He's still out there, somewhere. Branded now, literally, a hot iron to the shoulder. He'll never be welcome again. Not here. Maybe nowhere. You roll over in your cloak and mutter a quiet prayer. Not for justice, but to avoid needing it. Because in medieval Scotland, justice isn't about fairness. It's about survival, and not becoming next week's example. You've probably heard of castles, towering stone walls, grand feasts, roaring fires, banners fluttering dramatically in the wind. Sounds cozy, right? Romantic even? Well, that's because you've never lived in one. Castles in medieval Scotland aren't luxurious homes. They're damp, dark, and about as comfortable as sleeping inside a particularly defensive cave. If you're lucky enough, or unlucky enough, to find yourself inside one, it means you're either nobility or you've made some very complicated enemies. Let's start with the temperature. It's freezing. Always. Stone doesn't hold warmth. It just absorbs the cold and radiates it directly into your bones. The walls are slick with condensation. If someone drops a goblet, it echoes like a cathedral, startling the dogs and rattling the rats, of which there are many. You sleep under furs, sure, but you also sleep in your boots. Not because it's stylish, because you can't feel your toes otherwise. One mainstream fact. Scottish castles, especially those from the early medieval period, were designed for defense, not comfort. Built on hills, cliffs, or islands, they were positioned to control territory and withstand siege, not to make your morning tea pleasant. Wooden furnishings were sparse, windows were arrow slits, and heating was nearly non-existent. There's a constant smell. Damp peat smoke from the hearth, unwashed bodies, and something vaguely rotten. The kitchens are separate buildings, partly to prevent fires, and partly to keep the smell of burnt porridge from invading the entire stronghold. That doesn't work. You can still smell it in the stairwells. Bathrooms. That's adorable. They're called garderobes, a polite term for a narrow stone chute that drops your business straight down the outer wall, ideally into a moat, more often into a splatter zone you learn to avoid after your first humiliating misstep. One quirky tidbit? Some believe that the stench near the garderobe kept away evil spirits. It certainly kept away visitors. You might think, well, at least the nobles had it easier. Not really. Sure, they had more food and actual beds, but they were still freezing, damp, and constantly at risk of assassination, betrayal, or gout. You've seen a baron scratch at his ankles for hours before realizing his foot had gone entirely numb. Life in a castle is noisy. There's always clanking, barking, arguing, stomping. At any hour, someone's polishing a helmet, sharpening a sword, or shouting at a servant. The hallways echo like they're trying to give you a headache. And sleep? Forget it. Between the draft howling through the cracks and the guard chains shouting on the battlements, you get maybe 4 hours, interrupted. Meals aren't elegant affairs. They're messy, loud, and communal. Everyone dips from the same trenchers, thick slices of stale bread used as edible plates. When they soak through, they're tossed to the dogs or the peasants. Sometimes it's hard to tell who gets the worse end of the deal. Entertainment? Sure, if you like watching your cousin play a badly tuned harp or a bard recite the same 14-line lament about a lost sheep for the third night in a row. If you're lucky, there's a game of chess. If you're unlucky, someone suggests hunting, and you're forced to freeze in a bog for 6 hours, hoping a deer stumbles into your spear. Historians still argue whether castle life was genuinely seen as aspirational or merely a necessity for protection. Many lords longed for more comfortable manor houses, but the constant threat of war meant thick walls beat soft cushions. The Highland castles especially, bleak, rain-battered stone hulks like Urquhart or Island Donan, were more fortress than home. Then there's the politics. Castles attract power, and power attracts problems. You never know who's secretly plotting against whom. One false word, one mistimed alliance, and you might find yourself locked in the tower, or worse, escorted out the gate without your boots. You once shared a castle corridor with a noblewoman who whispered that the Lord Steward was poisoning the meat, not for revenge, for economy. Less meat means longer stores. You laughed. She didn't. That night, the sausages tasted off, and no one said a word. Despite the filth, paranoia, and lack of warmth, castles do offer one thing: safety. For now. When raiders or rival clans come knocking, you're better behind a thick wall with a few crossbows than you are in a hut with only a spoon and optimism. But safety breeds boredom, and boredom breeds trouble. You've seen more than one fight break out just because someone insulted someone else's hunting dog. And let's not even get started on sieges. Food runs out, water turns foul, people get desperate. You eat salted meat until your mouth bleeds and bread so hard you chip a tooth, if it lasts long enough. The rats start looking delicious. You curl up on a straw-stuffed mattress tonight in the castle's corner room. You're warmer than a peasant, but not by much. A drop of water hits your forehead from a leak no one can ever seem to find. The torchlight flickers. Somewhere above you, a sentry coughs. Because even in a castle, you're not really safe. You're just slightly less miserable. And now, you stand at the edge of the highlands, alone, maybe, or maybe just feeling that way. The sky above is bruised purple, streaked with low clouds that cling to the mountain peaks like smoke from a battle that never ended. You've made it this far, and somehow the land is still trying to break you. It's beautiful here, and it's brutal. The highlands aren't a place. They're a force of nature. Jagged ridges, mist-shrouded glens, valleys that echo every step like the hills themselves are listening. You move cautiously, every muscle aching, because the ground beneath you isn't so much soil as it is wet rock wearing a grassy disguise. One misstep, and you're tumbling down into a gorge so deep it might spit you out into the next century. You pause, glance behind you, and realize just how far you've come. Through war, famine, witch hunts, and weather that seems personally offended by your existence. But the highland terrain, that's the final boss. It doesn't hate you. It doesn't know you exist. which, in a way, is worse. One mainstream fact: Scotland's Highlands were sparsely populated during the medieval period, largely due to the harsh geography. Mountainous terrain, unpredictable weather, and poor soil meant that only the hardiest, by choice or desperation, settled here. You meet someone on the trail, wrapped in a wool cloak stiff with frost. He's a cattle drover, driving a dozen half-wild beasts toward a coastal village where they'll be sold or traded for salted fish. He nods once, doesn't smile. You nod back. That's the Highland way. Acknowledgement without invitation. No one's in the mood for conversation. Everyone's just trying to survive the walk without getting swept off a cliff or freezing solid halfway down the pass. Even here, where life is stripped to its rawest threads, the old clan feuds still simmer, maybe more quietly, maybe with fewer torches. But they're there, hiding in old grudges and newer scars. A wrong word at the wrong moment, and suddenly, your path is blocked by 3 men who don't like your plaid. You remember to speak with your mouth half open and your hands fully visible, because even high above civilization, someone's always watching. You carry everything you own on your back: a blanket, a flint, a small chunk of oat cake you're pretending is fresh. If you're lucky, a charm, an iron token or bit of carved bone meant to ward off the things that live in the mists. You don't believe in them. Not really, but you still rub the charm when the wind shifts in that certain way. Fringe belief. Some Highlanders claimed that whistling at night summoned the slua, restless spirits of the unforgiven dead. You don't whistle. You don't even breathe too loudly after sundown. You've heard enough stories to know that when someone disappears in these hills, people don't search. They just nod and say, "The mountain took him." And yet, there's peace in this hardship. No one expects comfort. No one expects mercy. You rise with the sun, eat what you can find, and walk until your legs tremble. You measure your life in firewood and footfalls, and somehow that simplicity feels honest. Still, historians argue whether Highland isolation bred independence or despair. Were these people proud and free, or just too far gone to be saved? You suspect it was both: a stubborn pride, born not from wealth or victory, but sheer, unrelenting endurance. You bed down tonight in a hollow, wrapped in every layer you own. The heather cushions your side like a half-hearted apology. The stars overhead are sharp and cold, a reminder that the heavens don't blink for you. You listen to the wind whistle between the stones and think of all the others who've slept here before. Warriors, outlaws, lost travelers, people who walked the same path hoping it might finally get easier. It never does, but you still walk it, because in medieval Scotland the Highlands don't break you all at once. They do it slowly, beautifully, and with such quiet certainty that by the time you realize it's happened, there's nothing left but wind and memory. So now, as the night deepens and the fire you imagined flickers low, your muscles soften into stillness. The weight of this harsh land lifts, if only for a breath. You lie beneath skies unchanged for 1,000 years, wrapped in a story not your own, but one that's carried you, quietly, through the rough paths and dark corners of a life you remember. The wind no longer bites, it hums, softly, gently, like a lullaby carried across moors and glens, sung by voices long turned to stone. The chill fades from your bones as your body sinks deeper into the furs, into the earth, into the hush. Whatever tomorrow brings, whether it's another battle, another frost, another meal that tastes like damp regret, it can wait. For now, in this stillness, the world forgives you. The highlands cradle you, not with comfort, but with something older, something quieter. A kind of peace carved not from safety, but from survival. Your breath slows, your eyes grow heavy, and somewhere beyond the mountains, where the mist parts for just a moment, the stars shimmer like promises waiting to be kept. Sleep now. You've earned it.